Howdy, fellow home studio wranglers. I'm Paul here at Fifth Dominion, and I wanted to bring you a unique tool and configuration to help you take your Arturia KeyLab MkII to the next level when you're using it with Pro Tools. This is going to be a longer video, but check below for chapters so you can dive in and out as needed. Here's what this configuration provides. It gives you a full set of functions beyond just the DAW mode controls to supercharge your sessions. These functions recreate most of the HyperControl protocol used in M-Audio MIDI Pro controllers. You can access the right pan knob on stereo channels, you can move to the start and end of your session, you can work with a single send across the active bank of 8 tracks, you can work with pan and all sends A to E on the single selected track. You can shift your track select buttons to also access arm, mute, and solo across the active bank of 8 tracks. You can navigate inserts and open and close plugins. You can change parameters with your encoder knobs. You can load presets by moving up and down through the preset menu. But that's not all. Thanks to the power of MidiPipe, I've also built these functions for you. You can drop markers silently during recording and playback and drop them while stopped. You can close all floating windows. You can zoom your timeline horizontally and zoom waveforms vertically. You can hold down some of the pads as keyboard modifiers like Command and Option. An optional voice guide helps you while you're getting used to the pad mappings. And the programming is entirely separated from Analog Lab V, so you don't have to worry about Pro Tools controls interfering with your Analog Lab functions. If you're going to make use of this setup, I do ask that you review this video in its entirety. I'll answer any comments and questions as soon as I can. By the way, if you haven't watched the first video and followed the steps there, please go do that first. You don't have to do any programming by hand. I've provided everything you need for your system. I'm going to assume that you've successfully set up everything from the first video. You've installed MidiPipe and the custom pipe file on your system. You have the custom configuration installed on your Arturia KeyLab MkII keyboard. You configured Mac OS X and Pro Tools for the proper controller routing. And if you need a link, click on the banner at the upper right of this video. Before starting, it may be a good idea to close both Pro Tools and MidiPipe, and then restart MidiPipe first by loading the custom pipe file, and then start up Pro Tools. You do need to have MidiPipe running already, so when Pro Tools starts up its controllers, it finds them in the right places. All right, let's talk about the KeyLab's operation modes. Almost always you'll want to be in user mode on your Arturia KeyLab MkII when you're using these configurations. I've customized these controls so they don't interfere with any of the DAW functions. So if you have Pro Tools selected for your DAW, you can then move to user mode, and you probably never have to leave it unless you want to run Analog Lab functions. By the way, all these controls have been carefully set up so they don't mess with your Analog Lab software. To use Analog Lab, switch to Analog Lab mode, and all your KeyLab controls will work perfectly. To continue working with Pro Tools when you're done, just switch your KeyLab back to user mode. The bigger MkII Pro keyboards had a set of 4 soft keys under the display window. When you hit them, they would change the functions of other keys and do useful things. Pads 13 to 16, the bottom row, are programmed to provide the exact same functions. Although you won't be able to see any changes in the KeyLab display, there are relatively few functions to remember, and there is a voice guide that will confirm your actions so you know what's going on. In this HyperControl emulation, you have 2 modes available, mixer mode and instrument mode. Each mode has several pages for organizing functions. As I describe the modes and pages, realize that as you move through them, you won't see anything change on the screen or on your KeyLab MkII. These modes and pages are emulated. They act the same way as if you were looking at an MkII Pro. I'm working on some ways to provide screen feedback on your KeyLab, but I'm not there yet. The voice guide will help bridge the gap in the meantime. There are really only 6 pages total, so it's possible to learn them quickly if you practice. Hopefully this diagram will make things easier. The mixer mode has the pages Home, Insert, Sends, and Channel, and it always starts on the home page. Mixer mode is where you start when you've just loaded up the MidiPipe config and Pro Tools, and you've just started up your KeyLab. The instrument mode has the pages Plugin and 1 to 8, and it always starts on the plugin page. Notice in this diagram that getting to the home page is quick, no matter what page you're on. In mixer mode, you can move directly from any of the insert, sends, or channel pages back to home in one step. You can also move from instrument mode back to mixer mode, which starts on the home page, in one step. Why is this important? Well, although I've taken a lot of care with these configs, it's possible for things to get out of sync on rare occasions. That's why I provided a panic function. Don't be alarmed by the name. If you can get your controller in a specific state, that is, emulating the home page, the panic function will synchronize the MidiPipe scripts. Then everything will be back to normal. How do you know you're on the home page if things are out of sync? It's simple. If your encoder knobs 1 to 8 are controlling the mono and left pan on the 8 tracks of the active bank, and the selector buttons are selecting tracks, you're in the default mode of the home page, even if the voice guide has said something else. I'll usually select a stereo track in the active bank, twiddle that encoder, and if the track activates and the left pan moves, I know I'm good to go. If at any time the voice guide seems to be out of sync with what you're seeing, such as the right pan and left pan being reversed, or you're just very confused as to which page you're on, try to get back to this state, which is the home page. Once you've verified you're in the default mode of the home page, hit Pad 2, the red pad, which is the panic function. This resets the state of the MidiPipe tracking and synchronizes it with mixer mode and home page. Now everything should be working again as desired. You should not have to do this often in normal use, if at all, but it's very important you know how so you don't get confused while learning in case an error happens. If you accidentally hit panic, don't worry. Just get back to the home page physically on the controller and then hit panic again. Then you can continue on with your work. Navigation controls are all arranged on pads 5 to 8. The light blue pads are for banks and the darker blue pads are for tracks. To move the active bank, use pads 5 and 6. To move the active track selection, use pads 7 and 8. You can also immediately select any track in the active bank using the Select 1 to 8 buttons in your track controls. The Arturia's HUI mapping for Pro Tools is missing a few important functions, such as moving to start and end of the session. So pads 1 and 4 move to start and end of the session. These are both color-coded orange, so you can remember them more easily. Pad 3 allows you to close any floating windows in your session. This will work regardless of what program you're using. So if you're using another application and you find that plugin windows or other Pro Tools windows are floating on top of the application you want to be using, just hit Pad 3. Pro Tools will be activated and the windows will be closed. You'll still have to move back to your application, but this still will save you some time. There's often not an encoder 9 on MIDI controllers, so Arturia doesn't map it to anything by default in the DAW. This control is marked Chorus on your KeyLab. Encoder 9 is set to zoom your timeline horizontally. If you hold down Option while using it, it will zoom your waveforms vertically. Now, do take care because this control is very sensitive. This is because moving the knob just a little bit creates a MIDI message. Every motion to the left or right does the same thing. The more messages, the more times you're hitting a zoom control. So a little goes a long way. Be very, very gentle with this control. The same is true for Selector 9. Arturia doesn't map this in the DAW either. This control is marked Multi on your KeyLab. Selector 9 is set to drop a marker. If the transport is playing, this happens silently so it doesn't interrupt your work. Otherwise, a dialog appears for you to name the marker. Now let's talk about this soft key row, pads 13 to 16. Pad 13 is the home page. If you're on the Insert, Sends, or Channel page, hitting Pad 13 will get you back to the home page, and the voice guide will tell you Home. On the home page, your selector buttons 1 to 8 select a track in the active bank, and the sliders control the faders in the active bank. Also on the home page, as I've said, your encoder knobs control mono or left pan on each track in the active bank. If you're in the home page and you hit Pad 13 again, your encoder knobs now control right pan on any stereo track in the active bank. Any mono track pan still works as well. The voice guide tells you as you change between pan functions. Remember that pan left from the voice guide indicates that you are in the default home page as usual. From the home page, you can immediately access any other page in mixer mode using pads 14 to 16, or you can jump to instrument mode with pad 9. Pad 10 is a special control called Flip. If you're in the home page and you hit Pad 10, the selector buttons will change their function, and the voice guide will tell you the new function. When you first start your session, the function is select, meaning you can select any track in the active bank. If you hit Pad 10 once, the function changes to arm, meaning you can engage the record arm button on any track in the active bank, whether it's selected or not. If you hit Pad 10 again, the function changes to mute, meaning you can mute any track in the active bank, whether it's selected or not. If you hit Pad 10 again, the function changes to solo, meaning you can solo any track in the active bank, whether it's selected or not. If you hit Pad 10 again, the function changes back to select. So again, the cycle goes select, arm, mute, solo, and then back to select again. The selector function stays the same even if you move between instrument and mixer modes or any other pages. To change the function, return to the mixer mode or home page or the send or channel page and hit Pad 10 until you get the function that you want. We'll come back to Pad 14 in a moment. For now, let's look at Pad 15. Pad 15 brings you to the sends page. This page allows you to access and control all 10 send slots A to J in your session. When you open the sends page, the selected send on the last selected track in the active bank opens, and the voice guide lets you know you're now in sends. This happens whether or not there is a send active in that slot. In this page, encoders 1 to 8 control the level of the active send on each of the tracks in the active bank. For instance, if send A is active, encoders 1 to 8 will control the level of send A for the 8 tracks in the bank. If there is no send active on that slot for that track, nothing will happen for that encoder knob. Your sliders, selector buttons, and the flip control work the same way as usual. If you hit Pad 15 again, the next send slot will be activated and the voice guide will let you know. These will cycle around once you reach slot J. Remember that your display may not show you all send slots, but they're still there whether or not you can see them. You can move immediately to any other pages in mixer mode, or you can jump to instrument mode. Pad 16 brings you to the channel page and the voice guide will tell you channel. This page allows you to focus in on one track at a time with the encoder knobs. Your sliders, selector buttons, and the flip control work the same as usual. The encoder knobs 1 to 7 now control left pan, right pan, and the send level for the 5 sends A to E on that track. Encoder 2 on a mono track does nothing, of course. A knob on a send slot with no send also does nothing. And encoder 8 is unassigned. You can't access sends F through J with this page, unfortunately. To focus on a different track, select it with a selector button. The encoders will now control the pans and sends on that track. You can move immediately to any other page in mixer mode, or you can jump to instrument mode from the channel page. If you hit Pad 16, channel page, again, while you're already in the channel page, the voice guide confirms, but nothing else will happen. On the insert page is where things start to get really fun. Pad 14 brings you to the insert page and the voice guide tells you insert. This page lets you select insert slots A to J on the last selected track in the active bank. Pad 14 works much like Pad 15 for sends, except that it only cycles through slots with a plugin installed. Note that if you did an Option or Shift select, Pro Tools won't react to any plugin commands on any tracks until you select or deselect a single track. Then that most recently selected track gets the insert focus. In the insert page, some of the controls that you've learned already change their function. The encoder knobs, for example, will start to control the operable parameters on the current parameter page on that plugin. Pads 15 and 16 allow you to page through the MIDI operable parameters in a plugin, 8 at a time. As you hit pads 15 and 16, the voice guide will tell you page minus and page plus as feedback. However, there's no way MidiPipe can know how many pages are in a plugin, so these pads will simply do nothing if they reach the beginning or end of the parameter pages, even though the voice guide reacts. Keep in mind that these controllers work even if the selected plugin isn't open on the screen. Don't panic though, that's coming right up. Remember that it may be difficult to tell in some plugins what parameters are active. However, if you have a keen eye, you may be able to pick out some colored dots or other markings that tell you what's selected. Then you can twiddle knobs to see what you're changing. While this sounds haphazard and prone to error, in practice, it's actually not a bad thing. Say you're using an EQ on a track. You may find yourself listening more rather than looking at EQ plugin numbers or the display to figure out what is working sonically and what isn't, and that's very good for producers and engineers. One pro tip here, often the very first parameter on the very first page of a plugin is the global bypass for the plugin, so in those cases your first knob lets you quickly bypass to hear the difference on your track. Not every plugin works this way though. The flip control also changes on this page. Pad 10 allows you now to toggle whether your sliders and encoders are flipped. When you first enter the insert page, your sliders control track levels, and your encoders control the plugin parameters. In the flipped status, you can use sliders to control the plugin, and encoder knobs change your track faders. This is handy because you can make wider moves more easily with faders than with knobs. When you leave the insert page, the flip status will remain as is, but only for as long as you're in mixer mode. You can move to the Home, Sends, or Channel page, and if you return to the insert page, controls will stay in the flip status you chose. When you move to instrument mode, the flip status is erased, back to standard unflipped mode. From the insert page, you can return to the home page or move to instrument mode. If you want to get to the Sends or Channel page instead, first return to Home, and then you can use pads 15 or 16 to access those pages as usual. Pad 9 puts you in instrument mode, which is a different and much smaller set of pages from mixer mode. You'll probably find you spend much more time in mixer mode. However, there are a few useful functions only accessible in instrument mode. When you enter instrument mode, the voice guide will let you know instrument. Sliders and selector buttons work the same as expected. The encoder knobs change to control plugin parameters in the same way as the insert page. Pads 15 and 16 act the same way as on the insert page, moving through pages of MIDI operable parameters. The flip control on pad 10 also works the same way as on the insert page. The flip control status lasts as long as you stay in instrument mode. If you move back to mixer mode, the next time you move to instrument mode, controls will be back in the unflipped default status. Pad 14 becomes a toggle to open or close the plugin window for the insert that was most recently accessed via the insert page. At first, it may seem tricky because plugin is not really a page unto itself. The typical workflow is to use selector buttons to select a track, then use the insert page to move to the desired insert, then go to instrument mode, and hit the plugin pad to open the plugin window. If you leave the window open and move back to mixer mode and the insert page, the open plugin window will change just as if you use the mouse or trackpad to select a new plugin. By the way, if you turn off the target control in the open plugin window, you won't be able to use this mode to open additional plugins. HyperControl was originally designed to provide feedback on plugins on a small display with no way to distinguish between multiple plugins on that one screen. If you need to use the target control, don't bother with insert page or instrument mode on your KeyLab until after you close all the plugin windows. Then you can re-establish control by selecting a track, going to insert page, selecting a plugin, and opening with the instrument mode again. One other gotcha, if you have a Pro Tools plugin dialog open, like Automation Setup, the plugin won't respond to this button to close until you close that dialog, which is no different than mousing either. Pads 11 and 12 become operational in instrument mode as well. Using these pads, you can move up and down the entire preset list in some plugins. Specifically, almost all the Air plugins provided by Avid, both the stock Pro Tools plugins and in the Avid collections provided with your subscription. Here's another pro tip. If you tend to set up your own presets in a plugin for use in many sessions, and you save them via the Pro Tools plugin window preset menu, as opposed to any function within the plugin itself, you may want to name those presets starting with a 0, or put them in a folder that starts with a 0. This will typically put them at the top of the list, so you can access them from these pads more easily. Finally, pad 13 no longer puts you back on the home page. Hitting pad 9 puts you back in mixer mode and defaults to the home page. Instead, pad 13 now puts you in the 1 to 8 page. This is a page that allows you to directly access up to 8 pages of MIDI operable parameters in a plugin. Whereas in the standard instrument mode for plugins, pads 15 and 16 page up and down through all available parameter pages, in the 1 to 8 page, pads 13 through 16 each toggle 2 pages. Pad 13 toggles between pages 1 and 2 of the plugin parameters. Pad 14 toggles between pages 3 and 4. You get the picture. To be honest, this is my least used page, but when you get to know certain plugins well, you'll start to remember where various parameters are. It's a lot like traveling roads you know well. You know where certain hills are, where there's a crumbling shoulder, and so on. So if you know where to find a certain parameter you want to fiddle with, you can get there faster with the 1 to 8 page. Unlike the standard instrument mode, you always know which parameter page you're on. Note that the voice guide will track this for you, but there is no way for MidiPipe to know which page a plugin was left on. The best way to get around this is to hit one of pads 13 to 16 before you start changing parameters. Notice that when you hit pad 13 to get into this page, pad 13 itself is remapped. It now becomes the page 1 and 2 selector. How do you get out or close the plugin? Just use pad 9 to return to mixer mode and the home page. If you need to get back into the plugin or just close it, hit pad 9 again to return to instrument mode, and you can hit pad 14 to toggle the plugin window open or closed, or page through MIDI parameter pages again as usual in that mode. If this sounds confusing to you, it's okay, you're not alone. In that case, you might simply want to avoid the 1 to 8 page by remembering don't hit the same pad, pad 13, for home when you're in instrument mode. If you only use that pad when you're in mixer mode, you'll never run into this 1 to 8 page, and you can probably live your life just fine without it. Now, this has been a lot, right? But wait, there's more. Pad 13 to 16 have a few more tricks up their sleeve. We've built the MidiPipe configurations, so it's smart enough to know whether you've tapped one of these pads or are holding it down. In fact, if you hold down a pad for more than about 400 milliseconds, it will be interpreted as a hold and not a tap. If you find that you are holding keys down and when you release them, you're not hearing the function happening that you expected, such as moving to home page or another page, it may be because you've held the pad more than 400 milliseconds. Therefore, it was interpreted as a hold and the function is not started. Instead, if you hold down any of pads 13 to 16, they'll work just like the left modifier keys on a Mac keyboard. From left to right, or pad 13 to 16, they move in the same order: Shift, Control, Option, and Command. If you hold any of these pads down, they will reproduce exactly the same keys on your keyboard. In fact, that's how your Mac will see them. If you have a separate mouse or trackpad device near to your controller, you might find this means you don't need to reach for your keyboard as often. By the way, the panic function also resets any errant modifier keys. If you find that Pro Tools is acting like you have modifier keys on, for instance, like Command or Option is being held down, and it's not, but you know that your actual Mac keys are fine, just induce a panic and things should be back to normal. Again, this should almost never happen in normal use. Here are a few pro tips you can use with these modifiers. Hold down pad 16 for Command plus a track select to select or deselect multiple tracks without changing other selections. Hold down pad 13 and 15, which are Shift and Option, while using your mouse to perform an action on all currently selected tracks, like changing the bus routing, or setting a plugin, or resetting faders. Hold down pad 15, which is Option, while using your mouse to perform an action on all tracks. Just like when using your keyboard and mouse though, be careful with this one. Hold down pad 16, which is Command, while you make a plugin parameter change using an encoder knob. Some plugins use this for fine-tuning. Some may use another modifier like Shift. Make sure to experiment with your favorite plugins on a dummy session in order to learn. Hold pad 13, which is Shift, plus the rewind or fast forward button to move to the start or end of the session. If you get pretty good at navigation, you may find that you don't need the voice guide any longer. If you're ready, first put yourself in mixer mode and the home page. Then hold down pad 15, which is Option, and hit the panic pad, which is P2. This will not panic the system. Putting yourself in home page is a safety net. Instead, you'll just hear the voice guide tell you voice off. You won't hear it again unless one of the following things happens. You send a panic, in which case just do this operation again, or you manually change the configuration outside of MidiPipe, which I don't recommend. If you ever find that you want the voice guide back, just do the same action, and the voice guide will confirm by telling you voice on. Anytime you have two controllers doing the same thing, it's possible to have a problem or two crop up. Even though the KeyLab is one unit, we're using it in two modes simultaneously, DAW and MIDI, and they overlap. As long as that overlap stays in sync, things seem to work very well in sessions. But if they get out of sync, for example, if you can see a set of track names in blue, followed by a set of track names in yellow in your project or mix window, you may have issues. To solve this, just line up the active track selection using both DAW and MIDI mode on your KeyLab so that they're the same. Then select track 1 in that bank in DAW mode and do the same in MIDI mode, select track 1. Then check that the plugin track functions are working correctly by going to instrument mode and using the plugin page. Once they are, you should be fine. If this doesn't work, try putting your KeyLab in MIDI mode, then get into the mixer mode and home page. Again, line up both banks as before. Now go to Pro Tools Setup and Preferences, go to the MIDI Controllers tab and remove both controllers and hit OK. Then go back in and re-add them. If you're not sure what to re-add, write it down first, or you can refer back to the earlier video for tips on how to do this. At this point, things should be synced OK. Okay, I know this has been a long video, but hopefully this tutorial gave you everything you need to start supercharging your workflow using MidiPipe and your KeyLab MkII controller. If this helped you in any way, please mash the like and subscribe buttons below so you'll know when a new video is available. And please let us know how you're doing with this video and with the tools. Leave us a comment. Let us know whether there's anything you'd like to see in a future revision of the configuration. We'd like to hear what sort of actions you use all the time that might be valuable for many producers and musicians. Until next time, I'm Paul here at 5th Dominion Studios, hoping you have fun making the music of your dreams.